Voilà, c'est à notre tour. Merci infiniment. Ravi d'être avec vous cet après-midi pour un panel qui devrait être vraiment stimulant au plan de la conversation. I love the title, Canada and Europe Between the Eagle and the Dragon. So you will have to figure out who's who around in this table. But we have Mathieu did a very good introduction to the theme of the panel, but we have three impressive panelists with us this afternoon. And I'm very honored to have here the Honorable Carlos Díaz-Rosillo, who's a founding director of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom at the Florida International University. Ali Borhani, managing director of 360 Strategic Advisors and co-founder and host of the BRI Dialogues. And Bernard Spitz, well known to all of us, CEO and founder of BS CONSEIL. We will get the ball rolling with Ali, whom I would like to him give us a perspective. It's all very nice about Canada, Europe, between the eagle and the dragon, but it would be interesting to have a perspective from someone who knows well the global South and see how they position themselves in the global system at this time.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with all of you, and I'm thrilled to be sandwiched between Bernard and Carlos and looked after by Pierre. But I think James Carville, who was the strategist for Democrats, once said, the economy is stupid. I think in today's world, it's the geopolitics stupid, because that is affecting everything. But to paint a picture, the world is changing. We have terminologies like BRICS Plus, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. But now 5 new members, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Iran, and KSA. Half of the world population are in BRICS Plus. 2/3 of world trade happens in BRICS Plus. BRICS Plus are adding 74 million consumers a year. That is 2 times Canada out of these markets. 32% of the world's natural gas, 43% of world crude supplies, and top 10 metropolis cities, none of them are in Europe today by population or in United States. BRI was a project that was spent $1 trillion chasing infrastructure gap and demographics that are looking to West for, narrowing that gap. The intra-BRICS trade today is larger than BRICS trade with G7. 6% of the trade as population is in the West, for that matter, in terms of when you look at Canada, United States, and Mexico, we're only 6% of the global population. And I'll stop in a second. And the largest buyers of energy and the largest sellers of energy happen to be in Global South and among BRICS Plus. So we're looking at the regridding and, rewiring of energy, finance, supply chain, and tech. And I'll stop there to listen to the eagle and to see where we go from there.
Well, thank you, Ali. Thank you for getting the ball rolling in that direction. Et je sais que Bernard a une grande préoccupation par rapport à l'Occident. Et l'Occident continue d'avoir un rôle très important. We really have the West that has benefited a great deal of the international order that has been quite stable up to a few years ago. Alors, Bernard, j'aimerais bien avoir ton point de vue. Et I know that given the European election, European Union election that we had yesterday and the results we've had in France, we would want to touch on that maybe later on in the conversation. But thank you so much for being here.
Merci Pierre et bonjour à tous. C'est effectivement toujours un grand plaisir d'être à Montréal pour cette conférence. C'est vrai que le monde change et peut-être qu'il n'a jamais autant changé que depuis. Ça fait 30 ans qu'il y a la conférence et je crois que ce n'est pas mentir que de dire qu'il n'a jamais autant. Le mouvement de bascule qui est en train de se produire n'a jamais été aussi fort. Et dans ce moment de bascule, il y a une place qui est celle de l'Occident. L'Occident, c'est qui? L'Occident, c'est nous, c'est-à-dire l'Europe, les États-Unis, le Canada, le G7 en gros, avec le Japon. Et l'Occident est la cible d'attaques venant de l'ensemble de la planète. Des attaques idéologiques, des attaques des démocratures, c'est-à-dire la Chine, la Russie, tous ces pays qui ont des semblants de démocratie, mais qui n'en sont pas, et que les vraies démocraties exaspèrent. Il y a l'islam radical, il y a l'intolérance woke, il y a l'anticolonialisme ou la reconstruction anticoloniale. Et on voit ça dans tous les continents. Et l'Europe et donc l'Occident est la cible de ces gens qui n'ont aucun rapport les uns avec les autres, mais qui ont cette hostilité, parfois cette haine de l'Occident. Et l'Occident, c'est quoi? L'Occident, c'est pas grand-chose. Démographiquement, c'est une petite partie du monde. Économiquement, ça l'est un peu plus, mais pas mais ça se réduit en pourcentage de l'activité mondiale chaque année. Et technologiquement, ça l'est encore un peu plus, mais pas pour l'éternité. Et donc, la question, c'est que dans une dynamique comme celle-là, où l'Occident, ce qui fait son identité, ses valeurs, ses points communs, son modèle de croissance, c'est un modèle aussi social, ou bien il est solidaire, ou bien il ne l'est pas. Et s'il n'est pas solidaire, ça pose des problèmes. C'est tout le sujet d'aujourd'hui. Est-ce que aujourd'hui déjà la fracture entre l'Amérique du Nord, plutôt les États-Unis et l'Europe, n'est pas un point qui vient de se concrétiser? Et si Donald Trump, mais ça c'est Carlos qui répondra, si Donald Trump est élu, est-ce que ce fossé ne va pas encore plus s'élargir? Et dans ces conditions, qu'est-ce qui restera si l'Europe n'est pas capable de s'aligner elle-même? Et vous l'avez dit, Pierre, les élections qui viennent de se dérouler montrent plutôt un phénomène de fragmentation au niveau de l'Europe, avec une montée forte de l'extrême droite. Je ne vais pas revenir, peut-être pas être trop long là-dessus, on en reparlera. Mais donc, eh bien, entre le dragon et l'aigle, je dirais que tout donne à penser qu'on est on est dans le rôle des herbivores au milieu des royaumes des carnivores, et ça n'est pas un avenir extraordinaire qui se précise.
Merci infiniment, Bernard. That's a very, very good introduction to where we are at in the West. And Canadians can relate very, very well to what you have just said. We live, we're joined by the hip with the United States of America. And of course, Carlos, everyone here is fascinated and terrified by what's going on in the United States. If I put my international trade hat, I see that President Biden, who criticized President Trump at the time for his tariffs on China, maintained all of those tariffs and even added some not too long ago. And now candidate Trump is talking about his 60% tariff around the clock for the whole thing of China. So on the trade side, we seem to see a consensus in the United States. But where, Carlos, I would like to have your lights is as if my foreign affairs hat. Joe Biden led the NATO alliance, very strongly, with sort of enthusiasm, and there are two more countries within NATO, and he loves alliances, all of the alliances. President Trump talked about NATO at the time as obsolete, and he said lately that countries who didn't pay up their membership, the United States may not guarantee their security. So on foreign policy, I do see an important divergence. So the question is, China is rising, and China wants to kick the United States out of the leadership. But my question to you would be, is the United States interested in leading the world?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Pierre. It's a pleasure being here with you. And I always enjoy debating with Bernard. We're now quite veterans of this, and I haven't yet debated Ali, but I'm sure we're going to have a great time. As I'm sure many of you remember, it wasn't too long ago when a celebrity candidate ran for president of the United States, won the election in a pretty resounding way. And most people around the world said, how can you let this guy have access to the nuclear codes? He's going to blow up the world. And that candidate was Ronald Reagan. And things were pretty well. 36 years later, another celebrity candidate wins the presidency, President Trump. And the argument was the same. How can you let this guy have access to the nuclear codes? He's going to get the U.S. involved in every possible war you can imagine. And the reality was that it was the only period, 4-year period in modern American history in which the U.S. did not enter into any wars or send any troops abroad. In fact, brought troops back home. So I think things are going to be fine for the world. I know people are terrified. There's no reason to be terrified. Yes, there is a difference between this administration and the previous administration, the Trump administration, in foreign policy. I think you're right to point out the fact that in trade policy, even though the current administration started with what I believe is an obsession with undoing everything else we did in the previous administration, now you're seeing a lot of similarities in a number of issues, including trade policy. On foreign policy, I think President Trump's vision for the world is very clear. It's America first. But America first doesn't mean America alone. It doesn't mean that the United States is going to be removing itself from all alliances. I think President Trump has been clear that NATO is an important part of U.S. foreign policy. It has been an alliance that has been critical to U.S. security. But the point that he has made is that the United States is paying an unfair burden, and that other countries should pay up what they agreed to themselves. And what you saw is that even though most countries are still not meeting the 2% fee that they agreed to pay, more are doing so right now. And I would argue NATO is stronger now as a result of the fact that more countries are paying up their fair share. So I think what you would see in a second Trump administration is more of that policy that puts the interests of the United States first. But again, America first doesn't mean America alone. And the vision for the president is an active American role in foreign affairs, but not one that meddles in other people's affairs, and not one that makes the United States bear an unfair burden in those alliances.
I think one element that the United States has that China does not have is precisely 46 dynamic alliances around the world. China has only one, North Korea. So I think it's a privileged position to have in the world, and that's interesting. Now, where will Europe be going? Because, vis-a-vis industrial policies of the United States and the Chinese approach to the economy, on defense, Carlos' words are reassuring. At the same time, I think Europeans cannot count entirely on U.S. support. They have to contribute more. So after this election yesterday, what do you see Europe, between the eagle and the dragon?
First of all, I think that what Carlos said is a key issue. What is the difference between America first and America alone? I mean, there could be a lot of interpretations, and it could be an empty space as well as something more consistent. Basically, the new situation, we have had the election just 2 days ago, and what we can see is that the Europeans are not aligned. So when we are talking about trade issues, if we are not aligned, it means that we are the dangerous path is the one which goes with an addition of national policies. If you have the addition of the French vision, the German vision, the Italian vision, etc., it's not a European policy. It's chaos. And when we think about what we have to face in terms of investment, in terms of technology, in terms of strategic autonomy in some industrial products, as we have seen during the crisis of COVID, in terms of energy, the climate transition, and in terms of defense. I mean, if we are not capable to have a global vision, at least, at European level, we are not capable really to have something consistent. We are not even capable to pay. And when you think about a country like Germany, Germany is the number one country in terms of growth and population and GDP. Well, their model was based on 3 pillars. One was free energy, or at least not expensive energy thanks to the Russian gas, selling products to China, and being defended free by the US. Nothing of these 3 pillars is alive any longer. So what are they going to do? To make their own choices, or to do things with the European? In terms of energy, we have a complete different vision of things. In terms of defense, it's not very clear what we have in common. So here is the difficult situation for Europe, is to be capable to act as a continent with a global vision, and not with just an addition of national policies. And it's We don't know yet, because what happened yesterday is not clearly a good thing. And I think the big winner of that, and I think Carlos will join me in saying that, is Russia at the first sight, because what makes Europe weaker is good for Russia. And at the end of the day, China, because they are all Muppets to the hands of China today, which has the control of the situation.
Oh, thank you so much. Ali, could you bring the Global South perspective in this conversation? And of course, I'll turn to Carlos afterwards to react to that.
Sure. I think it's important.
If I may just say, one thing that I'm noticing is that China is succeeding in making itself an agent of welcome change. And our discussions have led me that you are seeing that as well.
I guess it's important to see how the world is changing. I started losing my hair when I was at the age of 19. I started applying henna, Rogaine shampoo, and then lying to myself in the mirror. And then after a while, I accepted my bald head, and I'm happy ever after. So I think it's important to recognize that the world is changing, and it's important to see it from the other side of the mirror as well and see what the Global South is thinking. So I'm going to play the role of devil's advocate. The Global South is confused. China doesn't want to and cannot replace the United States. China wants to trade, sell, prosper. China is still a middle-income country, and China has an aging population, but China has been beneficiary of the United States security umbrella. But the Global South is confused because Global South hears, oh, net zero, don't drill. Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund now is digging at the bottom of the ocean, but no more oil for you in Global South. They say little things matter, and those who say they don't have never spent a night in a bed with a mosquito. It keeps you awake. TikTok is bad. We have to sell it. But President Trump and President Biden have jumped on the TikTok for the elections. Sanctions, weaponization of dollar for the Global South. So they say, how is it that India can sell Russian oil, but China selling and buying Russian oil is bad because India is selling and reselling? And then from their eyes, this international rules-based order, from their eyes, I'm just reflecting to you what they think, that's 6.5 billion people. They miss an eye in that. In their eyes, it's rules-biased order, international rules-biased order, because it's double standards. So for them, when we talk about Ukraine, they say, what about Iraq and Afghanistan? It's their view. We forget that China has capitalized on spending $1 trillion on infrastructure development. We may not be happy with the speed of the train between Nairobi and Mombasa, but it takes me from here to Calgary how many hours? Do we have a bullet train even in Canada? So I think we have to look from a different perspective, and this global gateway of Europe, fractured Europe, or build back a better world, is yet to deliver. The first Africa-United States summit was held after 8 or 9 years. So we got carried away with our financial markets, with derivatives, this and that. We forgot that there's another 6.5 billion people who need products. Global Development Initiative, Belt Road Initiative. We go and we apply sanctions, secondary, tertiary. And the moment you sanction China, Brazil suffers. Other commodity producers are suffering. So they are thinking about how to re-engineer and create a parallel system to prosper for themselves. It doesn't mean it's good or it's bad. They say when the United States speaks, the world listens. The question for all of us is the world still liking what it hears or not?
Thank you so much. Carlos, in Asia, there's one thing that we notice every time we go there. Our Asian countries, part of this global South, have enjoyed a lot of prosperity from China in the last 40 years, but they've benefited extremely of American security. So they've had American security, Chinese prosperity. They don't want to have to choose. Will the United States force countries to choose or find a way of living all together?
I think at some point there has to be a choice. That Ali, you mentioned that China doesn't want to and cannot replace the United States. I agree with you on the second part. I don't think it can, but I think it wants to. And I think it wants to do it desperately. It wants to do it economically, it wants to do it militarily, and it wants to do it culturally. And I think the United States has gone around the world telling countries to choose. And I think one of the biggest failures of American foreign policy, and this is a bipartisan failure, is not providing an alternative. Right now in the United States, there's very little that Democrats and Republicans agree on, except the issue of China. That's one of the very few bipartisan major issues. And I think the United States has failed in provide an alternative, meaning the government hasn't really encouraged the private sector to bid and to provide the services that the Chinese are providing. Infrastructure, I think, is the best example, the Belt and Road Initiative. Billions and billions of dollars going to the developing world to provide critical projects, roads and bridges and ports and airports. And as I talk to leaders around the world about, do you not realize that these investments provide a short-term benefit at a very, very high long-term cost? The answer is yes, of course, we get it. We would prefer to have American companies come in and bid, but they're nowhere to be found. We don't see American companies coming in and providing the resources to build those projects. And I think that has been a tremendous failure of American foreign policy in not working side by side the private sector to come in and provide those services that are badly needed around the world. Because I am convinced that in most cases, I don't want to say all, but probably close to all, if it's between a Chinese company owned by the Chinese Communist Party and an American company, they would prefer the American company or the European company. But when those companies are not there, when they're not providing those services, we're leaving the world without much of a choice. And so I think that has to be we have to have a restructuring of foreign policy so that we work hand in hand with the private sector so that those services and those projects that are badly needed have an American presence, have a European presence. And so we make the choice much easier for these countries to choose America, to choose Europe instead of China.
Carlos, I just want to jump in. Woody Allen says half of life is showing up. So we didn't show up. And that's not just the case of United States. I don't think it's just fair to say US wasn't there. Prime Minister Theresa May went to a Commonwealth country, Kenya, after 38 years as the first prime minister. But I think the issue as well is a bit in and around what we take, how good it is, in theory, what they need at that moment. Larry Summers was in a conversation with one of the African states, and he said, every time you guys come here, Europeans and Americans, you give us a lecture. Every time the Chinese come, give us an airport, a hospital. And then you just keep us on lecturing us. There was a gentleman next to Larry Summers, and he says, but allow me to explain how it is. Good. Didn't I tell you? They just sort of lecturing us. So I think it's as well about the delivery. When I am on a trajectory of losing capacity, unemployment, I need it today, not tomorrow. So,
yeah, but Bernard, China unites Europe and the United States in alarm, but differ on the solutions. And how do you see that?
Well, it's what the Europeans want is to have their own way to do things. And what is necessary is, again, that they can cooperate to not have each one on their solution. China is a good example because, it's clear that the Germans were the more involved with China, not only because that was part of their growth and their business model, but also in terms of recognition. For instance, Germany was, I remember Germany was president of Europe in 2020, 4 years ago. And at that time, there was a big issue about how Europe should react to China, the demands in terms of international trade at the WTO, etc. And the Germans wait for the 30th of December, between 30th and 31st in the night, to launch their paper, which was in a way to say, my friend Chinese, we cannot do everything we would like, but we want you to know how we want to cooperate and be nice with you. And that was a little bit a good example of a non-cooperative strategy, because obviously now we see what's going on. The European Union has launched inquiries about state aids. And it shows clearly that there are a lot of state aids from China. So this is the reason why we are going to decide taxes. But we are not going to take the American way, which are higher. We are going to take a halfway, so just to show that we are not aligned, but since still express some concern. And now the Chinese are going to attack in France the cognac, in Germany I don't know what. I mean, exactly they are going to choose it. Of course, this is the conclusion of that is very negative. It's very counterproductive on global trade. It's obvious. So how to get out of this? It's a fragile balance, because obviously if the US are completely, I would say, if they don't open any margin of decision, if you are not with us, you are against us, if this is it, we are going to nowhere. We are going to reduce trade in general. It will not be only decarbonization, it will be deglobalization, it will be absolutely a movement forward. And we will need, yes, alternatives, as Carlos said. There is another thing, which is the global south is not only China. We have to think about a little country named India, and which, by the way, has a higher population than China right now. And this is very interesting to see. Modi has just been re-elected these days, and he sees himself as an alternative to China. He says that, and I remember I was in Delhi last September because India was organizing the G20 and the B20, and he said publicly that China was having an attitude of neocolonialism, which is not a nice word in India, colonialism. And so the alternatives are first the world, and the global south is not is global. So there is an alternative to China, and it's also a capacity for the Western country and for the Western world to act with solidarity, and also to develop something which is more inclusive in terms of growth. But this is another question that we can mention later.
I just want to jump in very quickly. 18% of the land leased in industrial parks in Mexico today is leased by Chinese enterprises. 80%, 80. So yet in Mexico, 1 out of 3 live under the poverty line. That is equal to the entire population of Canada. So let us not take for granted the deficits we have among ourselves as well, and even on continental America. And I couldn't agree more with Carlos about the lack of another war under President Trump. And whether we like it or not, many things that President Trump stands for resonate in Global South on various issues, which we don't have the time for. So for Canada, the key question is, between a socialist Mexico with a new president, a protectionist America, possibly, what's in it for Canada? And I think that is a question for all of us coming to this wonderful forum to talk and to think. And as Bernard said, Global South is different than just, China. We conducted a study and we've written a report, 185 pages, interviewed 30 CEOs the entire summer. 22.5 pages are the challenges companies are facing in dealing with Chinese competition, Western multinationals. 2.5 pages are their strategies on how to mitigate. Only 2.5 pages. And these are Western companies. And this idea that they're only stealing our stuff and, they're after us. Yes, they are. It's a competition. It's good. It's bad. Yesterday was the college entry exam. 13 million Chinese students enrolled. 0.5% of that is 650,000. Okay? And 65,000, I apologize. 65,000. Give 1% that there are brains coming out of those colleges and students. So the production is not just in BYD, but it's also in graduates, education. 500,000 from Global South, Bernard, are on scholarships in Chinese universities that will go back to those capitals.
Well, China is really, presenting its vision to be as compelling as possible to nearly all countries in many ways. That's quite interesting what you just said about the United States, that China always depicts as the status quo country. But the way Carlos is describing is that the United States is not a status quo country. It is trying to also alter the international order. But it may be in a way that's encouraging what you're saying, Ali, when you say that in the Global South, some elements of the status quo that the United States might be attempting to do might be constructive and helping in challenging China's vision at this time.
I mean, China has spent billions and billions of dollars on cultural projects to try to get the world to like them more. And the reality is, after all that expenditure, in my opinion, it hasn't really worked. There's a reason why there's millions and millions of people trying to get into the United States. We have the greatest military in the world, but it's not because of our military might. It's because of our culture. It's because it's a country of freedom and democracy. And it's about the values that the U.S. promotes. So yes, China is trying to aggressively, in my opinion, replace the United States, not just militarily and economically, but also culturally. But I think on the cultural side, I think all their investments, all the billions and billions of dollars that they have spent over the years trying to get the world to like the Chinese better. And again, when I say the Chinese, I mean the Chinese Communist Party. That investment has been a tremendous failure because, again, people still believe in the ideals of democracy, of free markets, what the United States stands for. And so I think that's indisputable, in my opinion.
It's fascinating because against the Marshall Plan after the 1945, the only trade condition that the Americans imposed on Europeans for accepting the Marshall Plan, actually there were two. There would be one envelope for all Europeans, not individual envelopes of the Marshall aid by country to force them to speak. But the other one, do you think it was imposing on Europeans to buy cars or to buy? It was one thing, movies, access to the cinema. And it really, in terms of soft power, the United States did extremely well. And it might have also helped in the fall of the Berlin Wall when some of these movies and lifestyle reached communist countries. So that's quite interesting to me. I really understand very well what you're talking about.
And the Chinese are trying to use that soft power. It just hasn't worked.
But if I may jump in quickly, Taylor Swift still has to go to a stadium. And you can swing it where she swings for her vote, but you still need that stadium for your youth to play and to go and watch Taylor Swift. China is bringing the stadium now. We have to be on watch. And for Canada, I will just stop for Bernard to close. There's this story of this guy who was under a lamppost at night and searching on the ground very badly and nervously. And police officer comes and says, "What have you lost?" And says, my keys. He says, "Did you lose them here?" He says, "No." He says, "Why are you searching here?" He says, "Because there's light here." So Canada as well has to see where to find the keys to the world. And with that, I'll stop, please.
Bernard.
Well, in terms, I come back to what Carlos said in terms of culture, the cultural aspects, because maybe China, and it's very interesting what you said about their presence in Mexico on investment, but the previous trip was in Africa. And during many years, it was clear that China was investing in Africa to really take the resources and be prominent there, and it's a failure. Now in Africa, there is a big rebuff, and especially India is now trying to take the place. So it was a cultural backlash. And well, I think that we speak about just like a wheel of domination. Don't forget something, that Chinese are very good. They are very good in technology. They are very good in many productions. And so we have also this big competition in the future in terms of intellect, in science, education, etc. And this is one of the big issues for Europe, I would say, and certainly for the Western world, which is to increase our capacity and in our investment in technology, in education, in innovation. We are talking about energy, about IA. All these challenges are starting now, and the question is how we are capable to do it, to face it. It is clear that if we rely upon a national basis, we have no future on this.
Yes, Carlos.
Going back to my earlier point, I agree with you, Ali. For Taylor Swift to sing, she needs a stadium. And I would venture to say that if you ask most leaders around the world who want to have a stadium built, who do you want to have your stadium built by? The Americans, the Canadians, the Europeans, on the one hand, or the Chinese? Probably all of them, or close to all of them, would say the Americans, the Europeans, the Canadian. The problem is that we're not showing up. And the Chinese are showing up. And that's the problem.
Forget in terms of competition that the tickets in France were more or less expensive than in the US.
We're talking about Paris. The largest sponsor this year for Olympics is LVMH. And Monsieur Bernard, I know if I don't make a mistake. Who is the biggest market for LVMH? China as well. How is China going to capture the domestic market? They're producing domestic free zones for luxury goods to keep that in dual circulation in their economy. We have a quote from Rumi. It says, "Beyond right and wrong, there is a place, and I shall meet you there." And I hope United States and China can meet there.
I have a question for Carlos that preoccupies me a great deal. How is it that American politics seems so challenging at this time, so polarized and adversarial, and how can you maintain an economy so strong, so dynamic, creating so much employment with a politics that really doesn't seem to work?
I agree. American politics is incredibly polarized. It's not something new, by the way. Polarization has been growing over time. But I would say it's not just an American politics issue. You see it around the world. You know, our political systems are incredibly polarized. I would venture to say that on most issues, there's tremendous agreement between politicians of different political parties. It's just that we tend to focus on those issues that where we disagree. And those issues are the explosive ones, are the ones that make the headlines. But if you look at what's happening in cities across the United States and across the world, in provinces, in states, there's a lot of agreement. Just when we get to the national politics, when we see the headlines, when we see the news, that's where you see great divisions. For a good reason, there is a lot of division on those big issues. But I'm an optimist, and I do think that on the vast majority of the issues that affect daily Americans, daily Canadians, there's a lot of agreement, because ultimately what people want is for politicians to get things done and to solve the problems that affect them. And by focusing on those big ticket items, we see a lot of division, and that's probably not going to change anytime soon because the rhetoric is very charged. But again, it's not just in the United States. I think it's around the world.
I see our time is up. Can I give Bernard and Ali 30 seconds to conclude? Because I've really liked Carlos' conclusion. 30 seconds each, if you have a last minute.
I think that we are in Canada, and so for Canada, these issues are exactly the right one. We share so many things with Canada, especially French, here in Quebec. And so in terms of what we want to protect, we are completely aligned. How to do it? We will have to cooperate all the more to protect it.
I've said everything I wanted to say, just wanted to thank Nicola and the team and my fellow panelists, and I couldn't ask for a better panel and a better moderator here today and to being with you. So thank you.
A big applause for this panel.